Have you ever found yourself getting close to something you have wanted for a really long time and then almost without meaning to, you just start pushing it away? Maybe an opportunity finally appears, but instead of taking that next step, you delay it. You convince yourself you need more time, or you may start questioning whether it's really what you want. You become distracted by other things that suddenly seem way more urgent, or perhaps you know exactly what you need to do and you can actually see yourself avoiding it, but you still can't seem to stop. Yeah. And that's one of the most frustrating things about self sabotage. Often you know you're doing it. You can see the pattern. You might even be thinking, why am I doing this again? And yet, knowing what is happening does not automatically change it. We tend to assume that self sabotage means we're lazy or undisciplined, inconsistent, or perhaps even not serious enough about what we want. But I don't believe that that's usually the full story. Okay. A lot of the behaviors we call self sabotage began as a protection mechanism. And at some point, they may have helped you avoid rejection, criticism, disappointment, or failure. And that's the difficulty is that protection mechanism can remain long after the original situation has passed. And what once helped you cope can eventually become the very thing that keeps you from moving forward. And that is what we're going to explore today. Welcome to the Art of Beautiful Thinking podcast. I'm Yvette. This is episode 4 of the Authentic Life Blueprint series. But before we begin today's episode, I want to acknowledge a small change to the Art of Beautiful Thinking podcast. You may have noticed that Kat's not here with me. So the reason for that is Kat's actually moving overseas, which means she has made the decision to step away from her role as co-host. And I'm deeply grateful for everything Kat has brought to the podcast and for the conversations that we've shared over the last 12 months. It's actually been such a beautiful part of the journey of the Art of Beautiful Thinking. Now, the podcast is going to continue as a solo show, and this actually feels like a really natural next chapter for the Art of Beautiful Thinking. So moving forward, I'll be taking you more deeply into the work at the heart of the Art of Beautiful Thinking, along the lines of the ancient principle of knowing yourself and what that means in modern life. Now, for me, self-relationship is the practical expression of know thyself. It's not just self-awareness. It's how you relate to your thoughts, emotions, the body, your truth, patterns, and the choices, as well as your authentic self. So throughout the series, we're actually looking at the different elements that shape the relationship you have with yourself, because that relationship affects everything in your life. It affects the decisions you make, what you tolerate, how you respond to fear, whether you trust yourself, and whether the life you're living actually reflects who you are. In the last episode, we spoke about limiting beliefs and the stories you've repeated so often that they have started to feel like truth. And today's episode, we're going to talk about self-sabotage. What happens when the patterns that once protected us begin preventing us from becoming who we are ready to be? Now, self-sabotage is often what happens when those beliefs begin influencing your behavior. You may consciously want one thing, but another part of you is operating from an old belief about what's safe, what's possible, acceptable, or even what's available to you. So you end up being pulled in two different directions. And one part says, I really want this, yeah. And another says, but what happens if we actually get it? And observing that inner conflict really does matter, because self-sabotage is not always a lack of desire. Sometimes you want the change extremely. You really want that change, but you simply don't feel safe with everything the change may bring. So what does self-sabotage actually look like? It's not something that's dramatic. It's really not a dramatic thing. Most of the time, it looks quite ordinary. It might show up as procrastination, for instance, where you keep putting off the application or the conversation, that project that you've been wanting to do, the appointment or the decision. Or perhaps it can show up as perfectionism. You tell yourself the work is not ready, even though you've been refining it for weeks or months. And sometimes it might even be overthinking, going over every possible outcome and asking several people for their opinion, researching every option, and then ended up being more confused than when you started the whole project. But it can also look like overcommitting as well, like filling your days with other people's priorities and then telling yourself that there's no time left for what matters to you. Something I believe we have all experienced is that we may start something with a lot of enthusiasm and then suddenly lose momentum when it starts becoming real. And people often describe this as inconsistency, but there is usually something underneath it that acts as if it needs to protect you from something. And that is why simply telling yourself to be more disciplined may not solve the problem. Discipline can help with structure. It can resolve an emotional fear you've not acknowledged. So rather than immediately asking yourself, how do I stop doing this? It may be more helpful to ask, what is this behavior helping me to avoid? That question changes the entire conversation. It takes you out of self-judgment and moves you into understanding yourself better. So I want to move into the conflict between growth and safety, because let's imagine just for a second that you want to make a significant change in your life. Like perhaps you want to start a business, right? Or you want to leave your job, improve a relationship, or become healthier, get fitter. They're all pretty good goals. However, there's a part of you that generally wants to move forward, and you can see what's possible. You may even feel excited by it, but change also introduces uncertainty. So if you start that business, for example, people may judge you whether it succeeds or not. If you set the boundary, someone may be disappointed. And if you leave that familiar situation, your job, for instance, you no longer know exactly what's going to come next. Or it could be if you allow that relationship to deepen, you've got more to lose. So another part of you begins trying to keep this thing stable, okay? Not necessarily good. It's not necessarily fulfilling. It's just stable. And we often confuse familiarity with safety. And that's what it's going to do. It's going to bring you back to the familiar. And the situation may not make you happy, but you understand it. You're used to it. It's in your comfort zone, right? You know what's expected of you. You know how to operate within it. A new situation may be better, but it's unknown. And that's where the protective patterns often step in, where you delay, you question yourself, you become overly busy, and you decide you need more information, or you focus on every possible risk. And from the outside, it can actually look as though you do not really want to make the change that you say you wanted to make. But the inside, there may be a struggle between your desire to grow and your desire to remain safe. Neither part is necessarily trying to hurt you. The problem is that the part seeking safety often relies on old information. It's that when an old protection is still running in your life from maybe childhood. So many of the patterns you struggle with today may have made sense at an earlier point in your life. Perhaps speaking honestly led to conflict, or maybe expressing a need resulted in some criticism or rejection. And you may have learned that being useful made you more acceptable. So one of the things I used to do as a kid that also found its way into my adult life was that I would follow the rules set out by people in charge, believing that, if I follow the rules to a T, I'll get acknowledged as being a good girl and people would appreciate me. And this need actually came from being raised in a domestic violence environment where I did not feel loved or appreciated. So I sort of looked for it elsewhere. And it would show up in ways that would have me question myself continuously, because I felt I had to follow the directions given to me by others and not come up with my own, which led to me not trusting myself. And as you can see, these responses, they didn't appear for no reason at all. They came because of an environment that I grew up in. And at some point, they've helped me manage a situation, or even your situation. You did not yet have the resources, authority, or emotional capacity to change. And that's exactly what the scenario was that I had. And the difficulty is that we can carry these responses into completely different circumstances throughout our lives. So many of the patterns you struggle with today may have made sense at an earlier point in your life. Perhaps speaking honestly once led to conflict, and maybe even expressing a need resulted in some form of criticism or rejection. I know one of the things that I learned when I was younger was along the lines of being useful made me more acceptable. And that moved into my adult life as well, that I would follow the rules set out by people in charge, believing that if I follow the rules to a T, I'll actually get acknowledged as being a good girl. People would appreciate me more. And this need actually came from being raised in a domestic violence environment where I really did not feel loved or appreciated. So I looked for it elsewhere. But it would show up in ways that would have me question myself, because I felt I had to follow directions by other people and not come up with my own, which led me to not trusting myself. And as you can see from that example, these responses did not appear for no reason. Yeah. At some point, they have helped you manage a situation that you did not have the resources, authority, or emotional capacity to change. And that's exactly what my scenario was. The difficulty is that we can carry these responses into completely different circumstances through our lives. But the important thing to remember is that you have a choice, okay? And you may not have been aware of the choices back then, but now you do have a choice. You can say no if you need to. You are able to leave if that's what you've got to do. And you're allowed to make a mistake without it defining your entire future. And it's good to be mindful, okay, that the old response, it can still activate as though nothing has changed. And that's why a pattern can feel really automatic, okay, because your present day mind knows one thing while your emotional and behavioral response is still following an earlier rule from your younger self. And this is also why awareness is important. It's not enough on its own. The thing with awareness is you can understand where a behavior began, but you can still repeat it. Knowing the origin actually does give you context. Changing the pattern, that actually requires practice. So let's talk more about procrastination, because procrastination is probably one of the most common ways self-sabotage shows up. And usually we treat it as a time management problem. Now we will go off and we'll buy another planner or get a new schedule, create a more detailed list. And we promise ourselves that Monday will be different. And sometimes those things do help. But not all procrastination comes from poor organization. A lot of it is actually emotional avoidance. And you may not be avoiding the task itself. You may be avoiding how the task makes you feel. Now, think about the thing you keep postponing. What happens once it's done? Is that the thing you're avoiding? And maybe you'll receive an answer that you don't actually want to hear, okay? Because it could lead to more responsibility, or it may force you to find out whether the idea you've been carrying around will actually work. So, what about that constant need to prepare, right? Which can feel really productive whilst also keeping you safe from the result. And as long as you are researching, refining, planning, learning, and getting ready, the possibility remains intact, doesn't it? And you don't have to risk a yes or even a no. And you can stay in that comfortable space of one day. And at some point, though, preparation stops supporting the goal and it actually starts protecting you from it. And I find in these situations, the best thing to do is to ask yourself a really useful question. And that is, what becomes real once I finish this? And you may discover that you're not afraid of the work itself. As I said earlier on, you're afraid of what comes after it. So another wonderful self-sabotage pattern is perfectionism. And that often sits beside procrastination. And it can look like a commitment to excellence, and sometimes it is. But there's nothing wrong with wanting to do something really, really well, okay? The problem comes when doing it well quietly becomes doing it in a way that no one can criticize, or an avoidance technique. And that's a very different standard, because perfectionism can be an attempt to become untouchable. Like, for instance, if you think through every possible problem, perhaps no one can catch you unprepared, right? But if you refine the work enough, then no one can reject it. And if you wait until you feel completely confident, perhaps you will not make a mistake. But you cannot remove every risk from being visible. Someone may still disagree with you. They may misunderstand what you intended. And the result may not match your hopes. You might need to adjust as you go. There's nothing wrong with that. Now, that does not mean you failed. And failure, to me, actually means first attempt in learning, okay? Because it really is. You've done something for the first time. You may have failed as such, but really it's just a learning experience. And it means you participated in life. And eventually, self-trust has to take the place of uncertainty, okay? It just has to. So self-trust is not the belief that everything will go well. It's knowing that you will not abandon yourself if it doesn't, that you can handle the feedback without turning it into a verdict on your worth. And you can make a mistake and correct it, or be disappointed without deciding that the entire attempt was pointless, right? But once you trust yourself to deal with an imperfect outcome, perfectionism is no longer required to protect you. And that's what we all want, yeah? So when is doing too much also considered avoidance? Well, we usually associate self-sabotage with not doing enough, don't we? But sometimes it can look like doing way too much, like keeping yourself constantly busy, having a full calendar, making sure that people are relying on you. There's always something that needs your attention. And by the end of the day, there is nothing left for the work or the decision or that change that you said that was really important to you. And then you tell yourself, I just don't have the time. I just need more time in my day. But sometimes being busy is actually the protection, because as long as everyone else needs you, you don't have to prioritize yourself. You can avoid the discomfort of saying no. You don't have to find out what happens when your needs take up the space, and you can remain useful. You can also remain needed and accepted. And this often happens when your sense of safety has become connected to being available. Perhaps people have always known you as the reliable one, the strong one, the person who can handle it. And stepping back can feel uncomfortable because you're not only changing your schedule, you're challenging a role, a perception. And you may wonder whether people still value you if you're not going to constantly be helping them. And when you think about that, it's not really a time management question, is it? It's a self-relationship question. So why is everybody else's need automatically treated as more important than your own direction? Why is that? What do you fear will happen if you protect your time? And how often are you abandoning what matters to you so that somebody else does not experience disappointment? All good things to ponder, huh? And that leads us to visibility, which is another area where self-sabotage can become very clear. You might want people, to notice your work, but you feel uncomfortable promoting it. I know that that was me, definitely. You want the opportunity, but you're hesitant to put yourself forward. And you want to be recognized for your knowledge, yet soften everything you say so you don't appear to be too confident. I know a lot of people that fall into that category as well. So, sometimes we just hope that someone chooses us whilst avoiding the situation where we can actually be chosen. And visibility means people can see you, okay? They can actually see you. And that sounds really obvious, but being seen brings vulnerability because people can judge you, they can disagree with you, they can expect more from you. And yes, they can also appreciate what you do and recognize your ability. But if you learned that attention created criticism, pressure, jealousy, or conflict, then even positive visibility may feel unsafe. You can find yourself wanting recognition while simultaneously hiding from it. And that's a really difficult position to be in. You become frustrated that people don't see you, but you may also be reducing yourself in ways that make it difficult for them to do so. And the answer is not to force yourself to become highly visible overnight. It's to understand what being seen represents to you. Like, what are you expecting will happen if people see you? Whose response are you anticipating? And is that response actually guaranteed, or is it familiar? Things again to ponder. I reckon you can begin practicing visibility in a way that feels honest rather than performative. And I did exactly that when it came to getting the podcast started. So I really didn't want to put myself out there by myself. I felt a bit odd. I don't like seeing myself, on videos or in photos. And it was also putting my, being vulnerable, like really putting myself out there. And what would people think? And what if it failed? What if I failed? What then? And one of the things that I did was I contacted Kat to see if she would co-host with me to make it safe for me. And then after 12 months of doing that, I started to get the confidence in myself and started to build that self-trust. And here I am today doing a solo episode. So that takes me then from when we talk about fear of failure, which I mentioned earlier on as well, because that was one of the driving things there, was what does the fear of failure or even say the fear of success look like? I know a big one for most people is the fear of failure, and it can often be blamed for self-sabotage. And it does certainly play a part. And some usual thinking that pops up with the fear of failure would be, what if I try and it doesn't work? What will people think? Which is something that I had. What if I disappoint myself? Another one that I had. What if this proves I'm not capable? And you know what? The fear of success can actually create the exact same behavior. Success is not just receiving something good. It can also mean more responsibility, greater visibility. Another thing that I had, really putting myself out there. And that was something that was really big for me on that podcast. Okay. So what are the things that could change? That's the other thing. I may have different expectations. There could be changes in my relationship, all of those types of things. And it may require you to leave behind an identity you've known for a really long time. So you might wonder, well, what if this works and I have to maintain it? Yeah. Or what if people begin expecting more from me? So failure and success, they can both produce procrastination, perfectionism, overthinking, and avoidance. And that's why the behaviour alone does not tell you what's actually happening, because two people can delay the same action for completely different reasons. One is afraid of proving that they can't do it, and the other is afraid of proving that they can. So rather than assuming you know why you're avoiding something, pause and ask, what outcome am I trying to prevent? Because that answer may actually surprise you. Have you ever noticed that your self-sabotage pattern gets stronger when you get closer to the thing that you're trying to achieve? It often intensifies. The change becomes real, yeah? And then all of a sudden you just go, ah! And you think about starting something, you may be thinking about starting something for months, or you can talk about it, you research it, you plan it, and none of that necessarily threatens your current reality. But then when the opportunity arrives, the application is ready, or the conversation is about to happen, or the work is almost complete, or you have to commit, suddenly everything becomes harder. You feel really tired. You start doubting the whole direction. Another issue appears and takes over your attention, and you tell yourself the timing's just not right. And this is often the point where people assume they've lost motivation. But it may be that the change has moved from imagination into reality, right? And now there is something at stake. Your identity may need to change. You may have to disappoint someone, or feel that you'll disappoint someone. Or you may need to become more visible, which is my case. So the old protective pattern notices that the change is really close and attempts to return you to familiar ground. Now, I'm not saying that you should ignore every hesitation, because sometimes hesitation carries really useful information. The point is to become curious about why it has appeared now. Did something genuinely change? Or did the possibility simply become real? At the Art of Beautiful Thinking, we look at self-sabotage through the relationship you have with yourself. And that relationship isn't an abstract idea. You can see it in the way you speak to yourself. It presents in whether you listen to your body, whether you take your own needs seriously, and whether you honour your values when it's inconvenient, or how your commitments to yourself actually carry any weight at all. So self-sabotage often shows us where that relationship has broken down. And perhaps you keep making unrealistic promises to yourself, right? Then criticising yourself when you cannot maintain them. And maybe you ignore what you feel until the emotion comes out through avoidance or exhaustion. Another thing you may be doing is abandoning what you know is right for you the moment somebody else becomes uncomfortable. And all of that affects self-trust. And every time you tell yourself something matters, and then repeatedly it's an optional, you're sending yourself a message. You're saying, my priorities can always be postponed, right? My word does not really count. And other people's comfort matters more than my own truth. But then when a major decision does appear, you find yourself struggling to trust yourself. And trust is built through the way you behave towards yourself over time. One of the things I want to be really clear with is that you cannot shame yourself into alignment either. And that's not what I'm trying to do here, because when we see our own self-sabotage, the first response can often be frustration. And we'll usually say things like, why do I always do this? I should know better. I ruin everything, blah, 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 blah. But perhaps you become angry with yourself and decide that this time you'll force yourself to change. And you create a strict routine. You set an unrealistic standard and you push yourself really, really hard for a few days. And then you become exhausted and the pattern returns, and you see that as more evidence that there's something wrong with you. And that creates a cycle, avoidance, self-criticism, forced action, exhaustion, and then more avoidance. And then the shame kicks in. And shame may produce a burst of movement, okay? It really can do that, but it does not create sustainable change. In fact, shame often makes the self-sabotage pattern even stronger. And when your inner world becomes hostile, you are less likely to be honest with yourself. You're going to begin hiding what you feel. You avoid looking too closely because every discovery becomes another reason to attack yourself, because you cannot shame yourself into alignment. Alignment requires honesty. It requires responsibility, but it also requires enough internal safety for you to admit what is actually happening. You do that by asking yourself the right questions and becoming more compassionate with yourself. Now, compassion does not mean letting yourself off the hook either. Because whenever we talk about compassion, people can assume it means excusing the behavior, and that's not what I mean. Compassion is not this pattern developed for a reason so I can continue doing it. It's not pretending the consequences don't matter, and it's not waiting forever for action to feel comfortable. Compassion helps you understand why the pattern exists in the first place. And honesty asks you to face what it's costing you right now. And you need both. Because compassion on its own can become avoidance, and honesty without compassion becomes punishment. And these are just, some examples of like what you can be asking yourself through compassion and through honesty. So compassion, for instance, will say, I understand why this feels frightening. And honesty would say, but fear cannot continue making every decision. Compassion can also say, this response may have protected me once. And honesty says, it is preventing me from moving forward now. Having those two together, that's what brings balance. And so let's look at, what we can do to begin interrupting self-sabotage patterns. Like, let's bring it back to something practical, okay? So think about one behavior that you would describe as self-sabotage. Just choose one. But, and please don't try to overanalyze it, your entire life. You just want one. And name what you're actually doing. So start by describing the behavior without labeling it. Like, it could be something like, I'm lazy. Okay, try that, for example. So I'm lazy. And then what you can replace it with is, I have delayed making this decision for 3 weeks. And when you describe what you're doing, it actually becomes a lot easier to examine. Okay. Because when you say I'm lazy, okay, you're lazy. And that's pulling yourself down. But when you actually say, I have delayed making this decision for 3 weeks, you can then examine it and look at it and go, oh, what do I need to do to make that decision? What am I avoiding here? Yeah. And you can look at it and go, when does this pattern become the strongest? So did that resistance of making that decision appear when you had to make a decision? Or did it happen because it's going to make you visible? Or when someone expects something from you? Notice what happens. And also notice what happens in your body as well. Do you become tired when you are in that delay? Do you become tired? Are you restless? Are you tense? Does your mind suddenly become really busy? And do you feel the urge to focus on something completely unrelated, like washing the dishes or the grass needs cutting, those types of things? Because your body will often recognize the trigger before your mind explains it. So ask what the behavior is protecting, okay? What am I avoiding by doing this? And then go beyond the obvious answer. And when you go beyond the obvious answer, you ask another question. What do I believe will happen if I move forward? And that's often where you'll find the real fear. And once you identify the fear, look at whether it belongs to your life now, or is it something from your childhood? You don't have to dismiss the fear. You are just simply checking whether it deserves to make the decision. Because fear is just information. It's not always instruction. In fact, fear can come up because the outcome that you're looking for means a lot to you. So I have found in those situations that moving forward in small steps works absolutely beautifully. Just choose one action. It does not need to be dramatic, All you have to do, if you need to, send the email. Work on the task for 15 minutes a day. If you need to say no to something, say no to it. Or book that appointment that you've been avoiding. The point is not merely to get something done. It's actually building the evidence and building that internal self-trust. You're showing yourself that discomfort can be present and you can still move forward. And you're showing yourself that you'll listen to what matters. And that, as I said, is how self-trust begins to grow. Not through big, massive promises, but through small, believable acts of follow-through. So self-sabotage is not always proof that you don't want what you say you want. It may be showing you that some part of you doesn't feel safe with the change. And that doesn't mean you should stop. It means you need to understand what the pattern is protecting and whether that protection is still required. And you don't have to fight yourself for it, okay? You don't have to remain controlled by an outdated response. You can see the pattern for what it is and appreciate why the pattern developed while recognizing what it is costing you today. And you can feel the fear without handing it complete authority, okay? You can also move forward without waiting to feel completely certain as well. Just take that small step. And you can respond to yourself with compassion without avoiding responsibility. And remember, don't shame yourself into alignment because shame keeps you fighting with yourself. Alignment begins when you can be honest about the pattern, understand what lies beneath it, and choose a response that reflects who you are now, not simply who you once needed to be. So if this episode has helped you recognize some of your own protective patterns and you're ready to let go, well, the Authentic Life Blueprint Workbook is the place to begin. And the workbook takes you through the beliefs, the values, emotions, habits, and patterns influencing how you're living and the choices that you continue to make today. It gives you a really good structured way to look at where you may be out of alignment and understand what needs to change. You'll find a link to the Authentic Life Blueprint Workbook in the episode description. So today, start with one pattern. Ask yourself, what is this trying to protect me from? And what would an aligned response look like now? Great question. Thank you for joining me for this episode of the Art of Beautiful Thinking podcast. If this episode spoke to you and you believe it could assist someone you know, please forward them the link and subscribe to our channel. And in our next episode, we're going to actually explore emotional triggers and why some situations create such powerful reactions and what those reactions can reveal about the relationship you have with yourself. But until then, remember to think beautifully and live brilliantly. Ciao.